What's going on, guys? Welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how to test an engine out of a car. I got this motor a little while back from a friend of mine. He recently did a B16 swap in his 90 Civic hatchback. And he ended up giving me this entire swap. He was telling me it was having a little bit of overheating issues, but it was still running fine. So we're going to perform a compression test out of the car today. Now the easiest way to do this is with the transmission still attached to the engine. You need the starter on, and of course you need the flywheel. That way we can get it to crank. That way we can actually run the compression test. You're going to want a battery, fully charged hopefully. If it's not that charged up, you have a chance of it potentially not spinning the engine that well. So if you pull one out of your vehicle, you'll usually have full charge on it. You're going to need a compression tester, something to remove the spark plugs, and then a couple of wires that you can either put together or use some battery terminal wires. The reason being is we do need to get the battery connected to the engine as well as the starter power, so that way we can get to crank over. First off, just go ahead and get all of the spark plug wires removed, and then go ahead and pull out all the spark plugs. When I pulled out the third and fourth spark plugs, these had a little bit more oil on them. I had wiped them down, and so unfortunately we may have oil that has dripped into these two cylinders. So when doing the compression test you may get a higher reading, and the reason for that is the oil, it slides around the piston and it coats the piston rings, which give it a better seal. Unfortunately we can't run the engine and burn it out right now. So you may get a little bit higher reading on any sort of cylinder that does have oil on the spark plugs. The next thing I'm going to do, we're going to start with the negative side. I'm using an old, this is an old battery wire off of an 8891 Civic and CRX. So put the negative on, and this we're going to ground to the chassis on this particular engine. It's always right here on the transmission where the clutch cable goes through. So we're actually just going to attach this one right here, and we will tighten this up completely. And next we're going to do the positive side. So using that wire off of the same vehicle, we're going to hook it up to the positive side of the terminal, and this one has the connection which already goes to the starter. So we're going to run this to the starter and then just go ahead and reconnect the nut that holds that on there. Next, go ahead and get your compression tester fitted, and we're going to start with cylinder number 1. Make sure you have the correct connection on. I actually have the one that I stored in. This is the correct size for this particular motor. Okay, and that one is now ready. It's in there snug. Okay, now underneath the starter, it's a little tough to see, but this is where the little clip on your wiring harness normally connects in. What I'm using is I made a little female, used a little female crimp. I just crimped it to an empty-ended piece of wiring. So you're going to want to go ahead and plug this in here. And then once you do that, you can now go ahead and touch this to the other starter connection. And that right there essentially cranked the engine. And we can see that we have about a 178 on this particular cylinder. Okay, so right here I'm going to go ahead and reset this just so I can show you exactly how it worked. Back up to right around 178, 180 on the compression reading. Now I'm going to move on to cylinder number 2. Let's give that one a shot. That one looks like to be around 170-ish, 172-ish. All right, now we're gonna do cylinder number 3. That one also 177, 178-ish. And last, let's check the last cylinder. This one, 180, 182-ish. And after finishing that compression test, those are actually really good results for this engine. It's a D15B2 out of the 88 to 91 Civics CRXs, the LX and DX models. It was obviously swapped some point in its life because this was in an SI model car with all the multi-point parts on it, intake manifold, distributor and everything, even the transmission. But the A6 engine was obviously swapped at some point in its life, so they put this one in. Now that doesn't necessarily mean maybe the head gasket is leaking a little bit. He said he was having issues with it overheating. So what I'm going to move on to next is I'm going to test the thermostat itself. Easy to remove right now. Just remove, there's two 10mm bolts. This one on the bottom side and there's one on the inside. So we're going to get that thermostat out and we're going to check it, see if we can determine if it's opening or not. Maybe it wasn't opening as it should. I'm going to go ahead and get that thermostat removed. You may see an extra bolt on it, but that's just for the ground wires that go to the wiring harness of the car. Now this thermostat is pretty rusty. We're going to go ahead and boil some water on the stove and we're going to throw it inside and see if it opens up. In the factory service manual it says thermostats usually start to open about 172 degrees Fahrenheit and they should be fully opened at 194 degrees. So I have a digital thermometer which we'll be able to read and see what kind of temperature it's showing on the thermostat itself. That way when it's in the water we can check the temperature. So let me get a couple minutes, get this heated up, and we'll check and see if it's opening as it should. Okay, it's been in here for a couple minutes and it's getting close to temperature. We haven't seen it open up yet. Let's see where it's at. $162. Now I just dropped in a brand new thermostat. This is for a B18 engine, so it should be the same temperature. And it looks like it's not opening yet either, so I'm imagining this one shouldn't have opened yet. And here's a look at that thermostat, which is opened, and it's now closing as I'm lifting it into the air. You can see the area getting a little smaller and smaller as it's cooling down. But it looks like this thermostat didn't have any issues at all. And with the thermostat being checked, that pretty much wraps it up in terms of trying to check the condition of the engine. The overheating may have been caused by possibly a faulty radiator. Maybe the radiator was getting corroded and clogged up. Maybe the water pump isn't working as well as it used to. But essentially that's it. If you're ever trying to buy an engine outside of a car, that'll give you a good indication of the condition of each cylinder and if it's spinning by itself or making any weird noises as the engine's cranking. Now if the engine you're looking at already has the transmission removed, if you can get access to the correct flywheel that goes onto the engine, if it's already still on there, you can still test it if you have the starter. Now you need the starter. You're going to need the one long bolt which goes on the bottom of the starter, which connects to the transmission. And you're going to need to figure out the length of some spacers you're going to need to compensate for the area here where the transmission is no longer present, keeping the starter spaced out from the flywheel. Let me see if I can get the correct length, and I'll do that by pulling out the gear on the starter, making sure it connects with the teeth on the flywheel. Okay, and what I was able to do, I had these large washers which are normally for the rear motor mount on these cars. Put another washer here, and I got it lined up with the flywheel. So let's try that out and see if that spacing is appropriate. Okay guys, and with that hooked up, I went ahead and attached some jumpers here to my car because the battery's getting a little weak from me doing all this testing. I went ahead and connected the ground to the thermostat housing, and of course the positive to the starter, and then my other starter wire so we can touch those. You can actually touch it here or the positive. I always just touch it here to the starter. There you go guys. Easy way to get it started with the starter and just the flywheel itself. You don't need the transmission. And there you go guys. I'm not going to run a compression test on this motor. This is the single cam ZC that came out of my white 90 SI. Just wanted to show you how to get that done on that particular engine. But if you guys are considering buying a motor in the future, I hope this helps you out in determining whether or not that engine is in good condition. Thanks for watching guys. Take care.